fist. When my brother put his fist through a window on New Year's Eve, no one noticed until a cold draft cooled our bodies dancing. There was rainbow light from a disco ball, silver tinsel around the pictures. My brother held his arm out to us, palm upturned, a foot-high spray of blood. This was Ilford, Essex, 1993, nearly midnight, us all smashed on booze and ecstasy, and Billy, 6'5", folding at the knee, a shiny fin of glass wedged in his wrist. We walked into the kitchen, the good arm slung on someone's neck, Gary shouting, "Billy," Darren phoning for an ambulance. The blood was everywhere. I pressed a towel across the wound, around the glass, and led him by the hand into the garden. He stumbled down into the snow, slurring, "Leave it out," and "I'm okay." A girl was crying in the doorway. The music carried on, the bass line thumping as we stood around my brother. Gary talking gently, saying, "Easy, fella." Darren holding up my brother's arm, wet and red. The veins stood out like branches. I thought he was dying out there in the snow. And I got down, I knelt there on the ice, and I held my brother, who I never touched and never told I loved. And even then I couldn't say it. So I listened to that incantation, "Easy, fella," and my brother's breathing, felt him rolling forward, all that weight. Darren throwing down his can and yelling, "Billy, don't you dare," and shaking him. My brother's face was grey, his lips were loose and pale, and I was praying. Somewhere in the street there was a siren. There was a girl inside who blamed herself. There were men with blankets and a tourniquet, and they stopped my brother bleeding. As the new year turned, they saved him. The snow was falling hard. They saved us all. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Chris and Susie. It's so lovely to be here and to be the first poet in the Literature Showcase. I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic event. I'm going to read another poem about parties, in a way, but really more about sheep, essentially. This is one of these, I'm so urban that whenever I go into the countryside, I feel like it's magic's happening, and you're seeing cows and sheep, it's like these mythic creatures. And so I had this experience at a writing course. I'm sure that everyone on an Arvon course stares out the window, sees sheep or cows, and is moved to write a poem about them. So there should be a whole anthology, but this is my version. It's called The Calmness of Sheep. The summer I was 18, I stole a sheep. It was very late. I'd left a party, climbed the wet black hill behind the house. Hands sunk in the sheep's wool, I dragged her through the fields, her eyes like small moons that looked straight at me, a gaze I couldn't fathom, as with all animals, their thoughts are theirs alone. Soon I let go, walked on. She calmly followed over hills wrapped in the pale smoke of dawn. I recalled the sheep I drew as a child, flocks of faceless clouds on sticks, pinned to kitchen walls. We went on, our solitude unbroken until the first wall, a road, a house, the sound of a crying child. Here on the verge, we sat and I smoked, remembering the party and what followed, how I'd longed to climb the hill, to be alone. I could smell the sheep, the warm stench of an animal, and even now that night comes back to me, her wool and the wet black fields that I sometimes watch from this deafening house, where there were always parties and never the calmness of sheep. So my dad grew up in colonial Jamaica, very much looking towards England. But I loved, when I was at university, I fell in love with reggae music. And so this poem is really about my love of reggae music and also all the issues it raises for me about identity. I used to go out with a guy at university who loved reggae music as well. And when I told him my dad was from Jamaica, I think he assumed that my dad was some wise old Rastafarian, sat at home with a chillum and dreadlocks, and he couldn't have been further from the truth. So I sort of explore that in this poem. I mention in this poem lots of names of reggae and artists and sort of dub producers and kind of thing. And at the end, I reference a blues song, a Billie Holiday song, but it's sung by various other people as well. I think that's probably enough information. The poem's called Reggae Story. My father liked the blues and Lady Day. He left Jamaica way before the reggae rocked all night in backstreet studios, before King Tubby or Augustus Pablo. But I used to love a boy who loved dub reggae, loved thick lugs of ganja, loved on Sunday nights to cross the river, take me to the House of Roots and Abashanti and the cobbled arches under Vauxhall, where the Lion of Judah decked the walls and stacks of speakers pumped electric bass, a single bulb above the smoky haze, and on the stage a little dreadlocked man like Rumpelstiltskin shouted Jah and spun his blistering tunes on a single turntable, and men called back over the vinyl, Jah Rastafari. Next door, the old guys were like wizened goats with yellow eyes, hunched over games of chess and ginger tea below the golden-framed Haile Selassie, King of Kings. That boy didn't know my father was a white-haired, godless pensioner, and reggae music never really got me till I played it on my own. Bob Marley, Uroy, Johnny Clark, and even then it came like hymns or Fauré's Requiem, Vivaldi's Gloria. That boy thought I had a Rasta like Prince Farai for a dad, not the silent man who sat beyond the bedroom door I'd listen at to catch a woman crooning down an octave. I can't give you anything but love. So I should say some more about my dad. So a lot of the men and women, but mainly men that came on the Windrush, found employment in England in public service work for the railways or the NHS and that kind of thing. And my dad did that for a bit, but in the end he reverted to what he knew best, which was playing cards. He was a professional gambler, you could say. So my mum was like a middle-class teacher. My dad was this Jamaican Chinese gambler. And my most common memory of him was seeing him obsessively practicing dealing cards and scooping them up and mouthing the numbers and suits to himself. And in our house, we had, in the cupboards, there were tins of dice. There was a dentist's drill, in all kinds of stuff. And when our phone rang, often it would be these men on the phone with these gravelly voices asking for chick, or chan, or chin. And these were my dad's gambling monikers. And I knew it was my dad, but I told the kids at school that my dad was a night worker, or a cab driver, you know, that kind of thing. And so really, this poem I'm going to read now, Chick, is about sort of growing up not knowing who your parents are, or not knowing who my dad was particularly, and the whole mystery around that name, Chick. Chick. We talked about you all the time. Dan said he saw you ironing cellophane. I said you'd let me hold £1,000. We found a hollow-soled shoe. My cousins loved your tricks. They'd follow the lady, search your sleeves, blow luck into your fist. Mum called you a croupier. At school I said you drove a cab. Most days you were back at dawn. I watched through a crack as you slept, a hump of blankets in the purple light, the smell of sweat. I saw you once, Dad, knelt over cards strewn on the floor, panic in your face. For God's sake, Chick, you couldn't do the marks. Then each Tuesday, your pension, a paper, tobacco, one hand of kaluki. You sunk into the settee like you'd been kicked there. You shouted in the bathroom, asked me for money. At the funeral, a ring of phlegmy men with yellow eyes and meaty skin. They told me what your name meant, put the ace of hearts across your coffin, flowers shaped as dice. I'm going to stay slightly on the theme of childhood and childhood perception and read a slightly newer poem. I was thinking that, and I'm sure this is an experience for everyone, that when you're a child, time seems to go very slowly, and compared to now. And I was thinking about all the children that I went to school with, junior school, so from 5 to 11, and how I don't know any of them anymore. I moved away, they moved away. I think Facebook is very unromantic in that way because you can find out what people are doing, but I don't really want to know in a way because lots of these children exist as mythic figures for me in my head, and they're sort of with me all the time. I remember them. And so this poem is really about sort of celebrating, I guess, those children that I knew when I was a child. And the name of the poem is the name of the school that I went to, Barley Lane. I'm just going to read it. Barley Lane. Nishat of the seesaw, I see your buckled shoes where teacher caught you in a photograph, and I am caped behind you, rising with black holes between my teeth. And Mina, flower clips and tiny furry wrists I grip to swing you on the grass, and Nurpal of my street who taught me Hindi, ecto teen, and Paul McLean of number 53 who wore electric green, who smelt of coconuts, who smelt so good. And Helen Lawrence, who I vowed to meet at midnight on the railway tracks, each night's betrayal clicking on the other like a tube of coloured polo sweets. And Lindsay Noon and Kerry Noon, your mother wept in Sainsbury's. My mother said, not one but two, not one but two. And Jane, who took front seat and lived, a snake and ladder scar across her cheek. And all the children of the pool bursting out of pastel cubicles, and all the children of the playing fields in pastorals with lunch packs under willow trees or running hard away from me. Joanna of the flute, Abida of the flute, and David Edgar, first violin, waiting like a matron in the corridor to hush us into Christmas in the hall. 100 wire-hanger mobiles strung with tinsel turning in the air above us. Angels, angels, I've lost you all. I'm going to stay on the theme of celebrating things, I think. And when I was, much later, when I was 20, I lived in America for a year or two. I lived in Santa Cruz, as Chris mentioned, in California, which is famous because it's where The Lost Boys, the film, was set. And also, at one point, it was the serial killing capital of the world. The year of my birth, actually. But it never meant anything to me. So this poem is really about celebrating that time that I was in America. It's a kind of coming-of-age poem, I suppose, and it's addressed to, I had a roomie in America, a girl that I shared a room with, and I suppose in a way it's addressed to her. The poem's called Room. I missed that room we shared for a year, off the boardwalk, downtown Santa Cruz, both smitten with the landlord, an East Coast skateboarder who wore a beanie hat and used our names often and with meaning. Behind his bedroom door, a blue light glowed on rows of cannabis. My children, he said. This is how the spiders came, scuttling on the walls and through our sheets. We found them in our clothes and shoes, our hair. We returned to that room from days at the beach, where cold Pacific waves had pulled us under, shocked us from the searing heat, the fog of drugs and drink, enough to start over at sundown. One evening at the Lotus laundromat, I met a boy who bought me dinner on the freeway. Nachos, pinto beans with pork fat, enchiladas, sour cream. We went dancing in a clammy room behind the Silver Bullet, slamming shots that blurred the bar, bent double laughing at the pallid cowboys sat alone, their slimy ponytails, their bellies spilt over their jeans. I turned 21 next day and dialed my mother from a greasy booth along the boulevard, sobbed soundlessly into the static fuzz as punk-haired girls flew by on roller skates. A tramp with tattooed stars under his eyes was thumping on the glass. An orange Dodge pulled up, and I climbed wordlessly into the car beside a man I'd seen somewhere before. We rode down Sokol Avenue, past clapboard coffee bars and carousels rotating under pink and violet strobes, the hippies lolling on the sidewalk with their wrecked guitars. There's something fine about the dawn walk home from a stranger's house. The blue shore hazed against the sky, the sun rising defiantly, and boys already out on skateboards, rattling down the asphalt drives, arms flung wide as though about to fly. I'm going to read a couple more poems, and I think I'll return to poems about my dad. After my father died, which was 11 years ago today, in fact, I, after some time, became increasingly interested in the life that he had lived, playing throughout the 50s and 60s in the illegal gaming clubs of London and brothels and God knows where. And I traced a couple of his cronies, those that were alive, and I tried to find out as much as I could about the world of card playing, which wasn't a sort of glamorous existence, but actually a dangerous and unstable one. And I would say it took quite a toll on my dad's physical health and his mental health as well. And I found out all kinds of things, really. I taught myself how to play poker and kaluki. I went to casinos. It was all a bit of an adventure. And so I then began to try and sort of put some of these ideas into poetry. So the first poem I'm going to read, I'm going to read 2 poems on that subject. And the first one is called 5 Ways to Load a Dice. Like the yellowed cubes of knuckle bone they plucked from slag and ashes at Pompeii, speared with pig bristle or flint to slow the roll. Or like your father in the rattling alleys of Shanghai, who smelt his sweat among the shooters crouched like toads around the felt, who breathed into his palms to warm the wax he'd painted on. These ways are old. Now I read that juice joints play electric dice, magnetic wood lice curled inside, or tappers, hollow chambers filled with mercury that slips from side to side. In our house, dice the green of emeralds, or ruby red like cola cubes were hidden in a biscuit tin, behind the scarves and parkas, in the cupboard in a hall. There were rooms we didn't go in, but I saw you once, the door ajar, the curtains drawn against the sun. You were huddled like a scholar in the lamplight, goggles and a dentist drill, a pan of smoking metal, that smell. My dad was obsessive about cards and dice, and as I mentioned, he practiced and practiced over and over again, but he also cheated. He was, according to his friends, he was a very skilled cheat, had a credible sleight of hand, could make cards disappear into his sleeves and behind his tie and that kind of thing. And this all made sense to me because in our house we had all these boxes of marker pens and we had a little guillotine this size, and I never knew what it was for, but it was for shaving the edge off of a playing card so you could just feel it with your thumb. All kinds of stuff was going on that I didn't know about. So this poem is called Sharp, as in card sharp, and I should just say about it that all these cronies my dad had, they actually came round to our house and did building work and things. So I sort of knew them all as well. And so they kind of walk into my poems with the names I knew them by. So all the people that I mention in this poem are real. It's called Sharp. I have played at many tables. I've played with Manchester George and Billy Falco. I have dealt hands of baccarat, blackjack and chemin de fer. I have laid a royal flush. I have laid down nothing. I've heard the rasp of a thumbed deck as breathing. I've had the last pounds of pilots, the last pounds of housewives. I have played at many tables. I have blistered cards with pins and scalpels. I have played with Tony Walker, Black Allen and Paul from St. Lucia. I've harboured a queen in the curve of my palm. I've lost 1,000 on the horses. I've shaved the sides of knaves and aces. I've wept in the car. I've played at many tables. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Fantastic.